1,000 blades were flashing at the rising of the moon.
Greetings from the Northwest Homeland, comrades. It's August the 26th, 2010. I'm Harold Covington, and this is Radio Free Northwest.
There beside the singing river, that dark mass of men were seen. Far above their shining weapons hung their own beloved green. Death to every foe and traitor, forward strike the marching tune. And hurrah, my boys, for freedom, 'tis the rising of the moon.
On Monday, August the 16th, Comrade Bruce Carroll Pierce of the Order died at the Allenwood concentration camp in Pennsylvania. The cause of death is as yet unknown. He was 56 years old, and he will be missed. I will now read what I believe is the last article that Comrade Pierce ever wrote for the movement. It's entitled Chrysalis. The definition of chrysalis is the process whereby a caterpillar enters its cocoon and begins the transformation of becoming the butterfly we have all come to appreciate. In this case, I'm referring to the term as meaning something in the process of change, a metamorphosis or transformation that takes place in all things for better or worse. More specifically, I'm referring to the emotional and spiritual change occurring in each of us every day, for good or bad as a result of environmental factors in our surroundings. Our environment is determined largely by the effects of the media on us, be it print or screen, and now including the Internet. The values promoted by the media and the Internet are very often contrary to those we in the cause hold dear. They promote sodomy, we heterosexuality. They promiscuity, we monogamy. They internationalism, we nationalism. They promote democracy, we promote theocracy or national socialism. They advocate miscegenation, we teach racial purity. They speak of welfare, we speak of individual charity and responsibility. They want to tax us to the level of extortion, we tithe. They speak of immorality, we speak of virtue. They speak of materialism, we speak of idealism, etc., etc. There is no escape from the negative influences of our surroundings unless it's counteracted by a force, influence, or example of equal or greater intensity. Where do we look for a positive influence and example? I hope to offer in this article that follows some counterweights to these dangerous influences of our environment upon men and our duty to the cause and their families. I am an unashamed, primitive Christian, and my perspective will be from that point of view. Still, I think that most of what follows can be applied to each man of the cause, whatever his motivation and beliefs. The negative effects of the media on our environment are incalculable, insidious, and often without our awareness, not unlike the proverbial frog being slowly boiled alive in the kitchen stove. They remind me of a short story I heard long ago. To serve man, it seems aliens from a distant planet landed on Earth and soon began to solve all of mankind's problems. When asked why they were so benevolent, they answered by proffering as evidence a large bound book, titled in their script, To Serve Man. Meanwhile, excited throngs of Earthlings began to travel on the aliens' starships to their distant home planet. Then arrived one day an excited young linguist who, upon successful translation, exclaimed, "To serve man" was a cookbook of recipes on how to prepare man as a dinner dish. The aliens among us who control the media that so influence our environment also proclaim to have benevolent intentions. We, like the unsuspecting Earthlings of the story, are being slowly and inextricably softened up and prepared by these enemies of our God, race, and truth for the destruction of ourselves, our traditions, and all that we hold dear. Though we, like the unwitting recipients of the aliens' technological benevolence, are well aware of the corrupting influences and dangers of this wicked environment to our spirits and souls. Therefore, the fault of the decline of the proper behavior of men of our cause is largely our own, for with foreknowledge we have partaken of the poison that is contributing to the demise of our folk. Our enemies know that in order to destroy our folk, they must first weaken our resolve and compromise our men morally, which in turn weakens the family unit, which is the foundation and nucleus upon which our race and culture is founded. Having now recognized and discerned this change wrought in our folk and the subsequent decline of the moral principle and fiber of our men, we must endeavor to discover what kind of men were our fathers and the generations of our fathers before the advent of the negative media influence on our environment. Hopefully, we should be able to identify those virtues our folk once considered sacred and venerated, those ideas we held up as examples we wish to resemble, and we will compare them to the virtues of the men we have become. To find such an example, we need only cast our attention back not to the dim ages of antiquity, but to a mere 150 years ago to consider a man who, in my humble opinion, was the most noble and honorable white man born in North America, Robert E. Lee. It is not that he was a great Confederate general during the war between the states, or rather the War of Northern Aggression, after the South exercised her constitutional right to secede from the Union. This conflict was but the tragedy on the stage of history that brought Lee's character under all conditions to our attention. A man who said human virtue should be equal to human calamity. We shall now examine how his example is worthy of our consideration and emulation. Robert E. Lee's religion blended with the code of noblesse oblige, or honor impels. This, equally with his devotion to duty, resolved every issue in his life to black and white. There was no zone of gray or situational ethics in his life. His belief in God, as a gentleman of noble soul, never permitted him to break a vow or mistreat a friend, foe, or creature, and to always honor his word, even if such were unaccountably to rebound against his intentions. A man who said, "Duty is the sublimest word in our language. You cannot do more. You should never wish to do less." How few of us men nowadays say as much. We cast aside commitments and vows with ease when the ethic of the situation doesn't serve our selfish needs. Too often our wives and children are cast off when they no longer excite us, suit our gratification, or the responsibility becomes an inconvenience. We mix and change them like so much clothing. We despise the immoral antics of non-Caucasians, yet we behave in a fashion no better than they. Robert E. Lee was never a self-promoter and never sought praise or attempted to capitalize on his good name, nor after the Civil War did he attempt to avoid the potential consequences of his decision to support the Southern states' right to secede. After the war, Lee was destitute and his profession was gone. When offered $50,000 a year for the use of his name, he said, "My name is not for sale at any price." When an English lord offered him an estate and $15,000 a year, he said, "I must divide the fortunes and share the fate of my people." How many of us in this me-first generation of self-promotion that characterizes our age strive for the same humility that has always distinguished the very best men of our race? Instead of seeking exaltation and to be served, let us first serve with self-sacrifice and nobility our God, our families, and the cause. Robert E. Lee, it is said, was calm when others were anxious, loving when they were hated, and silent when they spoke with bitter tongue. While in the United States Army before the Civil War, Lee was asked his opinion of a fellow officer who had in fact been slandering him. Lee gave a good report of the man. When asked if he knew what the man had said about him, he said, "Yes, but you asked my opinion of him, not his of me." Too often we are bitter with our circumstances and slander one another treacherously for trivial reasons of dislike and pettiness, particularly when others do not share our opinions. And this is unbecoming to any people, especially in those of us who are ambassadors of the cause. Robert E. Lee was brave. His long indifference to danger bears out his bravery both during the war with Mexico and the Civil War. Though the commander of the Army of Northern Virginia, he attempted on several desperate occasions to lead a countercharge. President Eisenhower said in defense of Lee, "A nation of men of Lee's caliber would be incomparable in spirit and soul." In an age of hedonism, materialism, and the extreme of creature comforts, how many of us are idealistic, selfless, and brave enough to risk our very lives for a cause outside of our immediate self-interest and the truth it represents? These few examples of Lee's character and virtue under all conditions should suffice to serve as an example of the type of man we should strive to emulate. I know of no one this side of the grave who possesses the same degree of attributes that he did. Senator Ben Hill of Georgia said before the U.S. Senate, "He was a friend without treachery, a foe without hate, a Christian without hypocrisy, and a man without guile." Still, while we yet breathe, we must always practice virtue until it becomes habit, and daily teach those virtues to our children in word and example, and hold them up as the highest worth and value that a man can attain. Additionally, we must kindly but firmly hold one another accountable to a code of conduct, be they elders and esteemed, or the young and inexperienced. Without accountability, each man becomes a law unto himself, determining his own standard of right and wrong, and an isle of despotism and self-righteousness. By our silence, we condone bad behavior and contribute to the license and wickedness that will ultimately lead to disunion, anarchy, and the destruction of our folk and our culture. Finally, with these thoughts in mind, we must now begin the transformation and metamorphosis from self-destructive and race-destructive behavior that we have been conditioned to. Let us erect walls between ourselves and turn our backs on this profane age, and instead let our souls mirror what is noble, pure, honorable, and gracious. Serving God, grace, and truth, Bruce C. Pierce. These are the last words of a man who gave his life for our cause and for the Northwest American Republic. Let's make sure we don't forget him. Well, our time is up, and so that's it for this week's edition of Radio Free Northwest. This program is brought to you by the Northwest Front, Post Office Box 4856, Seattle, Washington 98194. Or you can go to the party's website at www.northwestfront.org. This is Harold Covington, and I'll see you next week. Until then, Sarsha Andenman. Freedom.
Follow in their footsteps of the rising